Obviously, this idea that allegedly William Gladstone proposed, namely that all ancient Greeks were colorblind, is wrong. Modern science confirms that ancient humans had the same biological systems for observing colors than we do.
For a while, some suggested that maybe the ancient Greeks just saw colors different than we do, or maybe they were all colorblind. But we now know that color vision developed around 30 million years ago, so that's not it.
The way the information is presented to us, it sounds as if now we know, but they didn't in Gladstone's time. Not quite. Grant Allen, a Canadian science writer and novelist, already did know in 1879, and he wasn't the only one, as he writes about the possibility of an absolute blindness to color in the primitive man. He says, the development of a new sense over just 3,000 years is unacceptable in terms of biological evolution. Now, going back to the colorblind thing, there are an estimated 300 million people in the world with color vision deficiency today. 1 in 12 men are colorblind. Sounds like a lot, but in the big picture that equals to only 8% of the entire male population on Earth. Moreover, only 1 in 200 women are colorblind, 0.5%. It just doesn't happen that an entire people are all colorblind. So yes, it's a silly remark, but you see the real problem here is the fact that William Gladstone never said that either Homer or the ancient Greeks were colorblind. In his writings, Gladstone argued that members of another culture might mentally categorize the world differently from us, without implying any change in the biological apparatus of human vision. Give him a little credit. And the funny thing is that when he wrote all this in 1858, he didn't even know what colorblindness was. Colorblindness was in fact first described in English in 1798, but it did not become a widely known phenomenon until far later. You can Google it. Google engrams it. According to Google Ngrams, the frequency of the bigram color blindness in British sources was essentially 0 until about 1850, and then rose gradually to about 4 per billion bigrams until about 1890. Gladstone himself told us that he didn't even know what colorblindness was in 1877, when he spoke about what he previously said in 1858. He writes, the curious phenomena of colorblindness had then been very recently set forth by Dr. George Wilson. So why is this myth about William Gladstone and colorblindness around? Because people are not familiar with 19th century word usage. Here is the incriminated passage. I conclude, then, that the organ of color and its impressions were but partially developed among the Greeks of the heroic age. You see, today the word organ certainly tends to suggest a physical element of anatomy, such as eye or heart, but in the 19th century it was frequently used to express a mental faculty. Examples: faith, belief, is the organ by which we apprehend what is beyond our knowledge. Clearly in this context the word organ meant a mental faculty, an aspect of cognition. So Gladstone's use of organ in the passage quoted did not imply that an aspect of the Greeks' physical anatomy was underdeveloped. Indeed, in 1877 he says, "Are we to suppose a defect in his organization or in that of his countrymen?" His answer to both questions was no. Let's get to the good stuff. You wanna know why Homer describes the sea as wine dark? The word translated as wine dark is actually more complex than you think. This adjective, which in later Greek meant approximately purple or dark red, is applied to the following natural objects in the Odyssey and the Iliad: blood, dark cloud, wave of a river when disturbed, wave of the sea, disturbed sea, the rainbow, and metaphorically to bloody death. This cognate verb is applied to the sea darkening, as well as to the mind brooding, and this compound adjective is applied to wool. Compare all of these usages with the Homeric epithet for the sea wine-looking. Evidently red wine really was seen as sharing an important visual property with the sea. But why? Well, maybe it was. Really think about it. It's like saying trees are green. Sure, trees are usually green, but depending on the season and the genus, some trees can be yellow, red, orange. Sure, the sea is usually blue, but it's not always blue. It can be green due to the floating sediments and particles in the water, algae, and plant life. But dark red? As someone who was brought up and spent most of his life in the biggest island of the Mediterranean Sea, I have seen with my own eyes the sea at dusk getting a dark red color. But as we enter the realm of literature, the argument they couldn't see blue becomes as weak as it gets. Colors gain a symbolic value depending on their psychological salience or importance in that language. In violent literature, red is going to be prominent because of blood, but it goes deeper than that. Homeric epics are poems. They have their own metaphorical language, for instance, ominous passages and their inner meanings. Readers might get the wrong impressions and print it on a newspaper. Both in the Iliad and in the Odyssey, the sky is described as being bronze, and even iron on several passages. In any case, it's unscholarly to just call them weird and ignore all literary explanations and come up with exaggerated ideas, like the one suggesting that maybe the ancient Greeks couldn't see blue. Look at these passages. Let's try and understand the analogy. The hooves of their horses beat up to the brazen heaven. So they fought on, and the iron din went up through the unresting air to the brazen heaven. And now the sun, leaving the butcherous mare, sprang up into the brazen heaven to give light to the immortals, whose wantonness and violence reach the iron heaven. Iron is often used in the epics to denote anything pitiless, hostile, unyielding, and inflexible. That includes, among else, the hearts and minds of warriors and funeral pyres. Literally speaking, those things have nothing to do with the metal called iron. It's the epic's metaphorical language. The bronze-like iron, it's used to denote the heart of warriors, Ares as the god of war, and the sleep of those who fell in battle. In non-ominous passages, brazen in this case denotes brightness. It could reflect the proto-cosmological view of the sky as a metal dome that covers the earth like a shield. It's an analogy which made sense in the mind of Bronze Age people, the expanse being a shield that covers humanity. The association of the sky with weaponry exists in Roman literature as well. Lucretius uses the phrase caeli lorica, the armor of the sky. The sky is brazen because it is connected to the gods. In the epics, their palaces are indeed said to be made of bronze. The appellation may have its origins in the fact that the sky is where meteorites come from, and the very first iron ever used by mankind was indeed from fallen meteorites. Iron literally fell from the sky. Is it really that strange to think then that the sky was made of iron? No language on Earth is able to describe accurately the millions of colors the human eye is able to distinguish. If fidelity is what you're looking for, then only numbers have the level of accuracy you want. On a computer screen, we work with the RGB color system, where each pixel has a mix of red, green, and blue light. You can then represent nearly 17 million distinct mixtures of RGB light in terms of a 6-digit hexadecimal code. Here are 14 different colors. Now, do you prefer D3D726? Or would you rather buy a shirt in C8CB28? Given they're very similar, but not exactly the same. I mean, I can be a little pedantic at times, but even I wouldn't make a whole debunking video to tell you that the color that the XY YouTuber called EE814B was in fact D56E3C. The very fact that we don't have nearly the language capacity to express all the color we see, and yet we still see them, should be enough to debunk the silly idea that the ancients couldn't see blue because they didn't have a word for it. This experiment goes back to a 2012 Radiolab episode about colors. In this episode, we're talking about Jules Davidoff's research on color perception. We are told about the experiment on Himba color perception shown in the 2011 BBC documentary Do You See What I See? Here is Business Insider's take. When shown a circle with 11 green squares and 1 blue, they couldn't pick out which one was different from the others, or those who could see a difference took much longer and made more mistakes that would make sense to us, who can clearly spot the blue square. But the Himba have more words for type of green than we do in English. When looking at a circle of green squares with only one slightly different shade, they could immediately spot the different one. Can you? As linguist Mark Lieberman discovered, is that the experiment shown in the BBC documentary is nothing but a dramatization. It's not Davidoff's actual research, and even the results and the description of such results was completely invented by the authors of the documentary. It's the editor's work, not the scientist's work. What the papers really reported was only that the subjects experienced slower reaction time when distinguishing the oddball color, not aware of any finding, and certainly none with the Himba, where a participant has failed to spot an oddball. Given this small but statistically meaningful difference in the color shade test is good science, but it wouldn't get you the views. Perhaps it wouldn't justify a whole documentary, I guess. Hence, the lies. The Himba couldn't see blue, they made mistakes, they couldn't see it. And that's why a creator like this guy, who really sounds like a nice guy, but he was deceived by the BBC.
Blue. When asked which square looked different from the others, they couldn't tell him.
As I proved before with blue, but I'm going to prove it now again with orange. Orange in English as a distinct color is also a recent origin, and it's relatively rare in languages. Chaucer described the color of a fox fur as, open quotes, betwixt yellow and red. He didn't have a word for it, but he could clearly see it. Peter Gainsford says people are misinterpreting the ancient Greek color words, and the terms kianios and glaukos cover most of the color space denoted as blue in English. It's not that the ancient Greeks didn't have a word for blue, it's just that the ancient Greek words in question cover several colors that include blue. Athena's eyes is a great example of this. At the very beginning of the Iliad, Athena's eyes could range from green to blue to perhaps even shiny silverly. The ancient Greeks had words for the different shades of blue. They just did not seem to use one collective term for all varieties of blue. One true fact that most of these videos got right is the fact that language does seem to have a sort of evolutionary priority scale when it comes to the emergence of basic color lexicons. But then attached immediately after what is solid science is this statement. In birds, the intense blue that we perceive is due to the microscopic structure of their feathers and the way they reflect blue and violet light. This is known as structural coloration. Don't get me wrong, it's fascinating, but it's beyond the point. It's irrelevant. This statement is used to justify the supposed lack of vocabulary to say blue. The animals do look blue, but it's not a pigment, so it doesn't count, so there isn't much blue around us, and that's why the word blue didn't develop. But of course it counts. This is a pigment, this is not. Could you have told the difference if I hadn't told you? No, and neither could the ancients. You know how I know? Because I told you in reverse. This one, the mandarin fish, is actually blue because of a pigment, and its blue coloring is a result of a cellular pigment called cyanophores. Both of them still appear blue, pigment or not. You know how I know that people of the past couldn't tell them apart? Because of Old Norse literature. In all poetic descriptions, ravens are described as being blur. So blue. When you read the sagas in English, you'll find them described as black, but that's not a literal translation. Black is svarter, blue is blur. They are described as blur, which demonstrates that when people see blue, they think it's blue, whether it's a pigment or not. And of course in the ravens, it isn't a pigment, it's structural coloration. Let's remember that all color is an illusion generated in a species-specific way. Colors only exist in your mind. No object is natively green or blue, that's just how you see it as a human. If I take a magnet called a transcranial magnetic stimulator and use it to inhibit area V4 on the right hemisphere of your brain, you will lose all conscious experience of color from your left field of vision. Remove the magnet and all color comes back. Colors need an information processing system to interpret them as color in order for them to exist. Sure, the electromagnetic radiation and its wavelength do exist, but colors are just our way to interpret them. Furthermore, to me, this is subtractively yellow. It absorbs all wavelength of light except for yellow light that then reflects back to my retina. To you instead, since you are seeing this on your screen, this is not subtractively yellow, because your screen is not producing yellow light. It can only produce red, green or blue. The yellow I see and the yellow you see are completely different, and yet they appear the same. Conclusion, it's easy to lie to the brain. This isn't yellow at all. It's the screen telling your brain a lie you can't help but believe. And now, dear noble ones, at the end of this journey, I have a question for you. Is the sky really blue?